Chapter 696. Seeing that Lin Wanru's attitude seemed to have changed, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su sat down at ease and took a sip of tea. Shopkeeper Ma said unhurriedly, "Both our families have prepared the goods. May I know when the Lin family will pick them up?" "There's no rush." Li Yi picked up his teacup and took a sip. "Before that, there's one more thing I need to make clear to the two of you." Lin Wanru looked at him, then at the teacup in his hand. Her lips parted slightly, but in the end, she did not say anything. "Feel free to speak your mind," Manager Su said with a smile. He looked at the young man sitting in the main seat, then at Lin Wanru. He thought to himself, the Bai family has plotted against the Lin family for so long, but in the end, it was all for someone else's benefit. Fortunately, Bai Yu did not come today. Otherwise, if he had seen this scene, he did not know how he would feel. Li Yi looked at them and said, "A few days ago, you unilaterally raised the price." Shopkeeper Ma said anxiously, "That's all in the past." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Because of your price increase, the Lin family just bought a batch of jewelry yesterday. At this time, we do not have enough money to accept these 2 batches of goods." "Is that so?" Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's expressions changed. "Therefore, we can only accept goods from one family." Li Yi looked at the two of them and said, "As for whether it is the Ma family or the Su family, you two can discuss it yourselves." Having said that, he took another sip of tea and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He smiled and said, "Today's tea is quite good. Did you change the tea leaves?" Lin Wanru's gaze lingered on his teacup. She said, "No, it might be because of the water. The water today was specially picked from the mountain spring by Big Brother Lin." Having said that, she glanced at Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su, whose expressions had changed slightly, but did not say anything. The price of the jewelry bought from the foreign merchants was low. Although it was not a small amount, the Lin family did not have to worry about it. If they really wanted to accept the goods from the Ma and Su families, they would only be a little nervous. He glanced at Li Yi again, and he more or less understood the meaning of Li Yi's words. One family. Shopkeeper Ma's expression changed slightly. He did not expect that the Lin family had already found a new partner. If he could only accept goods from one family, then the goods from the other family would have to remain in his hands. The reason why they had unscrupulously raised the price before was that this line of business had already been established in Fengzhou. The Lin family could only get their goods from these 2 stores. It was the same for them. Those big stores had their own channels. Without the Lin family, no one could buy their goods. It was not certain whether the goods could be sold in the future. If they could not get the silver today, they would not be able to complete the transaction with the foreign merchants tomorrow. They would have to watch a lot of silver slip away in front of their eyes. The loss would be immeasurable. Shopkeeper Ma stood up and sighed. The Ma family and the Su family have always advanced and retreated together. In that case, we have disturbed you today. Brother Su, let's go. Goodbye. Shopkeeper Su also stood up immediately. The two of them casually cupped their hands and turned to leave. Lin Wanru came over and looked out the door. She said, "They have left." Li Yi took another sip of tea and said, "They will be back soon." "Are you sure?" Lin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Li Yi smiled and said, "Wait and see." Although they called each other Brother Ma and Brother Su affectionately, it was just a fake brotherly relationship. When it came to the interests of each family, even blood brothers would turn against each other. The 2 families were currently short of money. Otherwise, they would not have come over to beg the Lin family to buy the goods. Now it was just a matter of who could not endure it first. The taste of the tea today is really different. It doesn't seem to be because of the water. Li Yi picked up the teacup and looked at her. Lin Wanru pointed to the teacup on the table and said, "This is red date and wolfberry tea, and this is my teacup." Li Yi was startled. He lifted the lid of the teacup and looked at it again. He slowly put down the teacup. The atmosphere in the room was a little awkward. Haha, red date and wolfberry tea is good. Red dates can nourish the body, nourish the blood and calm the nerves. Wolfberry nourishes the liver and eyesight. Drinking more of this tea can also improve anemia caused by menstruation. Cough, in short, drinking more is good. Li Yi coughed twice and stood up from the chair. He cupped his hands towards the door and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, please come in." Seeing Shopkeeper Ma walk in again, A trace of surprise finally appeared on Lin Wanru's face. A smile appeared on shopkeeper Ma's face and he said, "Haha, Miss Lin, I thought about it. We can still talk about that batch of goods again." Lin Wanru looked at Li Yi. Li Yi took a step forward with a troubled expression on his face and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, to be honest, our Lin family does not lack jade materials this time. Instead, we are more interested in the Su family's gemstones. So, Shopkeeper Ma, I can only apologize." Shopkeeper Ma was startled. His expression suddenly changed and he immediately said, "Miss Lin, think about it again. Recently, the market for jade has been very good. There is no harm in hoarding more goods." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Shopkeeper Ma. We still think 90%. Shopkeeper Ma looked at them and said, "I'll lower the price to 90%. 90% of the market price is fine." This time, the amount of lioli was huge. He calculated the family's surplus money and scraped together some from here and there, but it was still far from enough. The value of this batch of goods was not small. It could be said that this batch of goods was his last hope. Li Yi frowned and shook his head. "This is really not a problem of money." Shopkeeper Ma clenched his teeth and said with a trembling voice, "Give me another 5%. Can you give me another 5%? Money is really not important." Shopkeeper Ma's eyes were already filled with tears. He clenched his teeth and said, 80%. 80%. I can't go any lower. Go outside and ask around. There is no such price anywhere." Lin Wanru looked at Shopkeeper Ma. She had been dealing with him for many years, but this was the first time she saw such an expression on his face. When she turned to look at Li Yi, the expression on her pretty face became somewhat complicated. What confidence did he have to be able to force Shopkeeper Ma to this state? "Humph, you said there is no such price anywhere." A cold snort came from outside the door. Shopkeeper Su strode in and said coldly, "My Su family is willing to give you another 5% on top of the 80%. Surnamed Su, what is the meaning of this? Surnamed Ma, what is the meaning of sneaking back here? Aren't you?" Li Yi looked at Lin Wanru and shrugged slightly. He was very pleased with his prediction. Lin Wanru glanced at him and sat down on a chair to the side. She took a sip of tea and looked at the two quarreling men in the hall. She sighed. At this moment, she actually felt some sympathy for them. Suddenly, as if she had thought of something, she slowly turned her head and looked at the teacup in her hand. The expression on her pretty face froze and she didn't even swallow the tea in her mouth. "You two calm down. Calm down." The atmosphere between the two people gradually became white-hot. When one of them was already looking at the chairs in the hall, Li Yi knew that he couldn't let them continue arguing like this. "We are all doing business together. We see each other all the time. Don't hurt the harmony between us." He walked in between the two people and separated them. He said, "Isn't it because of the problem of the goods? I have a way to get the goods of both families to sell." "What way?" The two people immediately looked at him. "How about we sell the goods of both families at 50% of the market price?" Li Yi looked at them and encouraged, "This way, the Lin family will be able to buy all the goods of both families." "Pooh." Lin Wanru's body leaned forward slightly. She almost spat out the mouthful of tea that she didn't know whether she had swallowed it or spat it out. When she saw Li Yi looking at her, she awkwardly covered her face with her sleeves and secretly wiped away the water at the corner of her mouth. When she raised her head, the expression on her face froze. She had finally swallowed that mouthful of tea in a panic. At this time, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su finally recovered from the shock of that sentence. 50%? Why don't you just rob a bank? Shopkeeper Ma was the first to jump up and down. Shopkeeper Su quickly said, "Do you know what you are saying? 50%? How are we going to make a profit? Our Lin family is also in this business." Li Yi looked at the two of them and said, "Everyone knows how much profit there is in this business. You can still make a profit from 50%. As humans, don't be too greedy." "That's for you." Shopkeeper Ma looked at him and said angrily, "Brother Su, let's go." Shopkeeper Su's expression changed. He clenched his fists in his sleeves and finally relaxed them. He closed his eyes and said slowly, "Brother Ma, you go back first. I want to have a good talk with this greedy young man." Chapter 697. You. Shopkeeper Ma stood rooted to the ground and looked at Shopkeeper Su in astonishment. "You'll do it even if it's 50%? Shopkeeper Su stared into his eyes as if he could see through his thoughts. "Are you not going to do it?" Shopkeeper Ma's expression became a little unnatural after being seen through. He said in a low voice, 50%? I won't be earning much. It doesn't matter. Even if we can't do business, we can still be friends. Seeing Lin Yong looking around outside, Li Yi waved at him and said, "Brother Lin, come and send Shopkeeper Ma off." Shopkeeper Ma clenched his fists and loosened them. A dry smile quickly appeared on his face as he said, don't worry. Everything can be discussed. Without the Lin family, this batch of goods could not be disposed of in a short period of time. The business with the foreign merchants would also be ruined. That young man was right. If they sold the goods at half price, they would not suffer a loss. However, the profit would be pitifully small. Of course, if they rejected the Lin family, they would eventually make a move. However, they could not afford to wait any longer. The profit from this batch of goods was a small matter. Lioli was a big deal. They could not lose the big picture for the small. They had learned this principle decades ago. At this moment, while the two of them were feeling gloomy, they could not help but feel resentment towards the Bai family. If not for Bai Yu's persuasion, they would not have suddenly made things difficult for the Lin family, and they would not be in this situation today. Shopkeeper Ma turned to look at Lin Wanru. There was a hint of pleading in his voice. Wanru, 50% is too little. We've worked for nothing these days. Why don't we add another 10%? Lin Wanru raised her head to look at Li Yi. She stood up from her chair but did not reply. Shopkeeper Ma closed his eyes and said anxiously, 5%. Even 5% is fine. After the two shopkeepers left, Lin Wanru's strange gaze made Li Yi feel a little guilty. He looked away and said, "You don't know, but I'm actually very good at bargaining." Lin Wanru finally opened her mouth and asked, "Why did they still agree when we lowered the price to such a low level?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "How would I know? Maybe they found their conscience and felt guilty to the Lin family, so they wanted to make up for it and seek peace of mind. I heard that some people have some special hobbies. The more they lose in business, the more peace of mind they feel." The way Lin Wanru looked at him now was completely different from before. The final transaction price with the Ma family and the Su family was 55% of the market price, which was already an incredibly low price. Exactly half of the price they offered 2 days ago. This was simply unimaginable in the past. It could even be said that the Lin family got a bargain for nothing. Lin Wanru looked at Li Yi again. It seemed that since he came here, the opportunities for the Lin family to get a bargain for nothing had increased. Seeing that her eyes had been circling around him, Li Yi felt uncomfortable all over. He stood up and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. There's still a fish to deal with at home." Lin Wanru finally withdrew her gaze, stood up and said, "Thank you for today's matter. It's just helping to haggle. It's a small matter. I'm leaving." Li Yi waved his hand and walked out of the door. Watching him walk out, Lin Wanru sat down again and stared blankly at the teacup on the table. She had been in charge of the Lin family for a few years and encountered many things in business. She had also accumulated some experience and means, but all the means were generally in line with the norm. Today, her horizons had been truly broadened. She had seen very clearly that when Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su had left, their eyes were glistening with tears. Every time this happened, she would start to wonder who the people she had picked up back then were. Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's decisiveness had actually slightly exceeded Li Yi's expectations. He had thought that it would be good enough if they could lower the price to 70%, but it seemed that he had underestimated the importance they placed on the deal tomorrow. A large batch of azure glass was going to be shipped to the Qi Kingdom. This time, they were destined to suffer a loss. He felt a little guilty for setting them up twice in a row. When he walked out of Fragrant Forest Park, he was surprised to find that the two men had not left yet. The young man named Bai Yu was also at the entrance of Fragrant Forest Park. He must have bumped into the two men when he was about to enter. Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Su. Bai Yu was about to greet the two men, but they merely glanced at him coldly and walked straight past him. If not for Bai Yu, they would not have suffered such a huge loss this time. They had accumulated a bellyful of anger earlier, so naturally, they would not be in a good mood when they saw him again. Bai Yu looked at them suspiciously. "The two of you, this is... You're going to look for Miss Lin again?" Shopkeeper Ma glanced at Bai Yu and sneered. Nephew Bai, I'm afraid you're going to waste your efforts this time. You've been so attentive so many times, but in the end, haven't you ended up benefiting a pretty boy? Shopkeeper Su shook his head. Brother Ma, how can you say that? Nephew Bai doesn't know about this yet. Don't stab him in the chest again. Bai Yu's expression changed. What do you mean? What do you mean by cheap pretty boy? This time, the two men merely glanced at him mockingly before turning to leave, leaving Bai Yu standing where he was. His expression began to fluctuate. Li Yi walked past him. He glanced at the two men's backs and curled his lips. What kind of people were they? Miss Lin had kindly accepted their goods so that they would not miss out on tomorrow's big business. Not only were they not grateful, they even dared to spread rumors about her. Were they even human? He had seen all of this. Lin Wanru had always been clean and virtuous. The man who had appeared by her side was the married man, Lin Yong, who was in charge of her safety. Where did this pretty boy come from? Pretty boy. When he reached the entrance of his courtyard, Li Yi's footsteps paused. He turned around and looked in the direction that the two men had left. The trace of guilt in his heart instantly disappeared without a trace. It was a pleasure working with you. It was a pleasure working with you. Shopkeeper Ma nodded to the foreign merchant and opened a large box placed in the center of the shop. After carefully inspecting the items inside, he waved his hand at the shop assistant behind him. The assistant immediately handed the box over to Shopkeeper Ma. The foreign merchant took the box and opened the lid. He saw that it was filled with neatly stacked gold nuggets. Shopkeeper Ma said, "These were exchanged from the bank this morning. Please check them." The foreign merchant placed the box to one side and bit each gold nugget. He waved his hand and said, "There's no need to check. We believe in the Ma family's reputation." Shopkeeper Ma looked at the foreign merchant and said, "I don't know if you have time. I'm holding a banquet at Agarwood Tower today." The foreign merchant waved his hand and said, "The Bai family and the Su family are still there. They're waiting for us." Shopkeeper Ma smiled and said, "In that case, I won't keep you." He casually pointed at an assistant and said, "Go and see these important guests off." When the few of them walked out of the shop, he opened the box again and saw a pile of sparkling and translucent glass inside. His face was filled with ecstasy. "We're rich, we're rich." Outside the shop, a shop assistant saw the foreign merchants out and said, "Gentlemen, I'll see you off here. Goodbye." Chapter 698. The box of gold was very conspicuous in the room. It was not that Li Yi had never seen so much money, but he had only seen such a scene of a whole box of gold in front of him in a TV series. When they were most short of money and manpower, they could only rely on selling jade pendants and poems to barely make a living. It was such a difficult period of time. It was only a month, but with so much money in front of them, their hearts were already calm. If it was someone else who saw so much gold, they would immediately become a nouveau riche. They would not be happy if they did not go out and spend hundreds of taels of silver. He closed the box and put it under the bed. When he walked out, he saw the second young lady of the Lu family slowly practicing Tai Chi in the courtyard. This was the improved version of Rui's Tai Chi. It focused more on actual combat, and the movements looked more beautiful. "Get ready, we'll go out in a while." Li Yi looked at her and said, "What are we going to do?" Mississippi Lu continued her movements and asked without turning her head, "We've earned so much money. How can we not buy something to splurge on? Why don't we spend at least 1,000 taels of silver?" Li Yi urged, "Hurry up, we'll leave after we finish eating." No matter in the past, present or future, women couldn't resist the temptation of shopping. Even a fairy like Second Miss Lu, who didn't eat the food of the mortal world, would occasionally like to go shopping, even if she only bought a bunch of useless things. After finalizing the plan for today, when Li Yi was busy in the kitchen, Lin Yong came over, leaned on the door and asked, "Li brothers, do you have anything to do after dinner?" Li Yi did not turn around and said, "I'm going out to buy something after dinner." Lin Yong clapped his hands and said, "Miss is going out in a while. She asked me to ask you guys if you want to go out together?" Since Lin Wanru refused to pay him the last time, he would always do something intentionally or unintentionally. For example, he would give Mississippi Lu a hairpin, a bracelet, or when he passed by a clothing store and saw a beautiful dress, he would also buy it for her, like a disguised compensation. This kind of thing happened every few days, and Li Yi was used to it. Okay. Li Yi only hesitated for a moment and nodded in agreement. For such a long time, second Miss Lu had been staying at home to recuperate. Occasionally, she would go out with him. Other than him, the only other person she came into contact with was Lin Wanru, who would occasionally come to talk to him. Li Yi noticed that Lin Wanru did not seem to have many friends. Every day, she would go to the Lin family and go to the shop. These two women did not like to talk, but during this time, they actually established a strange relationship. Of course, although they did not like to talk, there were different levels. When he was with Mississippi Lu, Lin Wanru talked more. It was actually a very tiring thing to go shopping with women, because they did not know tiredness at all. When passing by the most famous rouge and powder shop in Fengzhou City, Mississippi Lu and Lin Wanru went in, and he and Lin Yong could only wait outside. Although there was no sign outside the shop that said, "Men are not allowed," generally men would choose to avoid it. Inside there were all women. The mixed smell of rouge and perfume made Li Yi very uncomfortable. Lin Yong squatted on the steps and asked, "Li brothers, such a small bottle of perfume, actually dared to sell for 2 taels of silver, and these women still rushed to buy it. I really don't understand what they are thinking." Li Yi lowered his head and glanced at him. If a rough man like him could understand the mind of women, the sun would rise from the west. 2 taels of silver was nothing. A small bottle of limited edition Blue Enchantress in the capital of the Jing Kingdom cost 200 taels of silver, and a large group of people rushed to buy it. Even so, there was no market for it. Even if you had money you could not buy it. The perfume in the Qi Kingdom was only bought from the capital. 1 bottle could be bought for 2 taels of silver, and it could not even recover the cost. If the perfume sold by these black-hearted purchasing agents was not diluted, his name would be written upside down. Next to the shop was a tea stall. At this time, there were many customers in the tea stall, drinking tea and chatting. Li Yi was not in the mood to listen to them. He estimated that in at most half a month, they would be able to set off for their return. This time, they did not enter the Qi Kingdom too deep. If they were fast, they could reach Xuzhou in 2 days. Under his careful care, Mississippi Lu's body had recovered. The closer the day of their return, the more he looked forward to it. There were still some faint voices in his ears, such as, corrupt officials, first prince, for the country and the people, and so on. Lin Yong was a restless person. Li Yi did not pay attention to him, and the old man beside him would not talk to him either. He simply moved his butt and leaned to the side. "You don't say." This time, those people have really done a lot of good things for Feng Province. Corrupt officials should be arrested, the more the better. The more they arrest, the better the lives of the people will be. A young man dressed like a scholar glanced at him and said, "That's true, but nothing is absolute. It may not be a good thing to make such a big fuss and go to war. The whole Feng Province and the neighboring provinces are in a mess, which is not a good thing for the people." Someone said, "Yes, which official is not corrupt? Big or small, the result is the same. These days, there is no one in the county government to handle the case, and the bandits have become rampant. Every morning, people go to the county government to report the case, and there is a long line at the door. They were all ordinary people, drinking tea and chatting. Finally, Lin Yong found someone who was willing to talk to him. He simply sat beside the tea stall and chatted with the people. Li Yi leaned against a pillar, thinking about whether Rui would give birth to a boy or a girl, and what name he should give to the boy, and what name he should give to the girl. Suddenly, he heard a voice. "Young master, what do you think about the first prince's investigation of the corrupt officials in Feng Province?" He turned around and saw an old man with gray hair standing up beside the tea stall. The old man looked at him and said with a smile. Li Yi looked at him from head to toe and shook his head slightly. He was holding a small book in his hand, which was probably a record of all kinds of rumors he had heard from the people of Feng Province. The thin bamboo tube at his waist should be filled with writing brushes. Looking at his extremely familiar appearance, he could catch anyone on the street and ask them about their opinions on the current affairs of the court. The censors of the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom were all the same. They had a few new tricks up their sleeves. The way they handled things was also simple and crude. Even if they were a little tactful, it would not be easy for people to guess their identity. One could not speak carelessly in front of the imperial censors. These people were all hearsay memorials, which meant that as long as they heard some news, no matter whether it was true or false, they could openly talk about it. If Li Yi said that the third prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Yi, and the sage of poetry Zhao Xiaofan had some kind of shady deal for a long time and it was heard by one of the censors, it would not take long before everyone knew that the two of them liked men. They did not have to take responsibility for their words. This was the privilege of the censors. How else can I look at it? I'm standing in front of my house. Li Yi looked at him and said, "These few days, the soldiers have been arresting people outside every day. It's very lively." The old man had a smile on his face. He was about to ask some questions, but his mouth opened halfway. He did not know what he wanted to ask. Chapter 699. I'm asking for your opinion on this matter, not where you stand, nor am I asking if you're enjoying the commotion. Zhang Yuanliang had been assigned to the Imperial Censorate a few years ago to oversee the military, economy, and production in Feng Province and neighboring provinces. He would report to the capital every 6 months. Feng Province was governed by the third prince. The people lived in peace, and the politics were clean. Although there were occasional crimes committed, they were almost negligible. These crimes were unavoidable even in the capital. Other than assigning the censors to various places, the Imperial Censorate would also conduct a large-scale operation every year. They would send out a large number of censors to patrol the provinces and counties. They were responsible for investigating and impeaching officials. This large-scale operation by the Imperial Censorate was normal, but it was also abnormal. This was because there had never been a time when so many officials had failed in the examination of any province. The severity of the examination was so severe that even the censor, who could not bear to offend anyone, could not stand it. Because of this matter, Feng Province and the neighboring provinces were in a state of chaos. The officials were in a state of panic, and they were not in the mood for official business. Naturally, there would be some chaos among the people. This made him wonder if the first prince was using this opportunity to take revenge on a personal grudge and deliberately drag Feng Province into this mess. Based on his relationship with the third prince and his position, it was not strange at all that he would do such a thing. If this was really the case, he could not just stand by and watch. Of course, before that, he had to fully understand the public opinion. He had almost walked through the entire street, and everything was going smoothly until he met this young man who interrupted his train of thought. Opinion. Li Yi looked at him and said, "I'm just a commoner. How dare I discuss the affairs of the state?" Zhang Yuanliang frowned and looked at him. The affairs of the state are closely related to everyone. Whether you're in the court or in the marketplace, what's the difference? As an ordinary citizen of the Qi Kingdom, I'm just asking for your opinion on this matter. Ordinary citizen? Don't joke around. How can an official be the same as an ordinary citizen? Li Yi looked left and right, then looked at him and asked, "Where are your people hiding? Are you going to arrest me as soon as I speak? Let me tell you, I won't fall for such a clumsy trap." The censor stared blankly at the young man in front of him. He opened his mouth but was speechless. After a long time, he spoke again. The government has to act according to the law when arresting people. When have they ever used such a ridiculous reason? If that's the case, then I'd like to ask you, which government office is so bold? This official? Li Yi looked at him with an expression as if he had expected this to be the case. And you said you're not an official. The old man silently retreated to the side of the tea stall and didn't say another word. Li Yi leaned back against the pillar and shook his head. He had already thought of a satisfactory name, but after being disturbed by the old man, he couldn't think of it. Brother Lin Yong, come in quickly." At some point, the voice of Lin Wanru's maidservant came from inside the shop. Lin Yong, who was sitting next to the tea stall, turned his head. After a moment of shock, a surprised expression appeared on his face. He asked, "Was Xiaofan calling me just now?" As soon as he finished speaking, the young maidservant's voice suddenly became shrill. "What do you want?" She was the one who made the first move. Lin Yong's expression changed. He jumped up from his seat and immediately rushed into the shop. Li Yi looked at him in surprise and followed him in. Inside the shop, a few men surrounded Mississippi Liu and Lin Wanru. On the ground, a slightly good-looking woman sat on the ground in a very indecent position. At this moment, she was hugging the thigh of another young man and complaining. "Young master, they bullied me. You have to stand up for me." The young man patted the woman's hand and helped her up. He said, Don't cry. Don't worry, I will stand up for you. Lin Yong rushed to Lin Wanru's side and asked, Miss, what happened? Are you all right? Lin Wanru looked back at Mississippi Lu and just shook her head slightly. The maidservant named Xiaofan said hurriedly, Just now, Miss had already bought that perfume. That lady said she saw it first and insisted that Miss give it to her. Miss only said a few words to her and she wanted to slap Mississippi. Then, Miss Lu grabbed her wrist and gently shook it. She sat on the ground by herself. At this time, the young man came over and looked at Mississippi Lu. After a moment of shock, he said slowly, Let's not talk about who saw the perfume first. I'm afraid it's a bit too much for this lady to hit someone without saying a word. Xiaofan said unhappily, It was you who started it. Lin Wanru patted her on the shoulder and walked out. She looked at the young man and said, We are very sorry about what happened to this lady. However, everyone in the shop saw clearly that it was the lady who started it. Even if we report this to the authorities, we are still in the right. Why don't we each take a step back and let this matter end here? What do you think? The young man looked at her face for a long time and then looked at the other woman behind her. He suddenly smiled and said, Miss, you are really reasonable. This is a small matter. It's not good to make a big deal out of it. We were also in the wrong just now. Let me buy this bottle of perfume as an apology, okay? By the way, I still don't know your name. The woman behind the young man had a smug look on her face. Suddenly, things took a turn. Mr. Dujin, who had promised to stand up for him, suddenly changed his mind. Not only did he not intend to pursue the matter, but he also wanted to give the perfume that he liked to that woman. Mr. She pulled the young man's shoulder. The young man turned his head and looked at her coldly. The woman felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her head. She could no longer say anything. I appreciate Mr. Dujin's kindness. Lin Wanru took a step back and looked at Mississippi Lu. She said, Let's go. Miss, please wait. The young man took a step forward and reached out his hand to stop them. However, his shoulder was pressed against by someone's palm. Li Yi used his other hand to point at the woman with heavy makeup who was standing there in a daze. He said, Your lady is over there. Who are you? The young man frowned and asked. Li Yi tilted his head and looked at Mississippi Lu and Lin Wanru. He then turned his head to look at the young man and asked, What do you think? The young man was stunned for a moment. He seemed to have thought of something, and a look of pity appeared on his face. What a pity! The expression on his face became one of disgust. He looked at Li Yi and said coldly, I hate it when people touch my shoulder. Li Yi patted his other shoulder and said, This is an illness. It needs to be treated. Chapter 700. In many cases, a beauty could be equated with a source of calamity. On the streets of the 21st century, ordinary people couldn't help but take a few more glances when encountering a beautiful woman. They would be bold and shameless enough to approach her and ask for her WeChat number. If they took a liking to each other, they would go further. This was a very normal thing. This kind of thing had been like this since ancient times. As time went on, some aspects would become more and more advanced, while others would regress. In the conservative ancient times, this kind of thing was much more open than it was in the future. Ordinary people could only take a few more glances when they saw a beautiful woman, but rich and powerful young masters wouldn't spend a lot of time to pick up girls. They would just snatch them if they didn't agree. Otherwise, where did the classic scenes in dramas and novels come from? From a philosophical point of view, any consciousness was essentially a reflection of objective existence. It could be found in reality and couldn't be created out of thin air. Zhen Guanxi forcefully married Jin Suelian. Gaoya forcefully snatched Lady Lin. In the water margin alone, there were more than 10 cases of women being forcefully snatched. Art came from life but was higher than life. When Mr. Shi wrote these stories, he didn't create them out of thin air. Being in a foreign country, Li Yi didn't want to cause trouble. However, seeing such a playboy touching Lin Wanru, he couldn't pretend that he didn't see it and act like he didn't. There was no need to be afraid at all. Sue's head was standing at the door. Was there a need to be afraid? I said that I hate men touching my shoulders the most. The smile on the young man's face disappeared. He took 2 steps back and ordered the men, break both of his hands. I'll see who dares. Lin Yong roared and stood in front of Li Yi. The men who looked like guards walked over to them. The woman in the shop had long run out in fear, but it attracted the pedestrians on the street to stop and watch. The two young men strolled on the street. If one were to observe carefully, they would notice that the people around them would look around vigilantly from time to time, forming an airtight encirclement around the two of them. Zhao Zhang looked around and said, "Brother, these censors have been stirring up trouble in Feng province recently. You won't blame me, right?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "This is the duty of the imperial censors. Imperial brother worries too much." As the two of them walked along, they saw some chaos among the commoners. Zhao Zhang was very pleased with himself, but when he turned his head, he saw that Zhao Yi's face was expressionless. There was a hint of anger, but it was gone in a flash. "My heart is comforted that royal younger brother understands." Zhao Zhang nodded his head and said, "Imperial brother has good intentions." Although Feng province looks stable on the surface, there are still many hidden dangers inside. If we don't punish these parasites, I'm afraid they will become a big problem in the future. Zhao Yi nodded, but did not speak again. The problems that had been exposed in Fengzhou were far beyond his expectations. He thought that there would always be some vermin, but he did not expect there to be so many of them. The people from King Feng's mansion had been following those censors all the time. It was impossible for them to be biased. Because of this, he really noticed some things. Feng province was under his watch, but it was already like this. How bad would the other places in the Qi kingdom be? If it was not treated, the country would be destroyed in the long run. This was the historical experience that he learned from the history books. It was inevitable, but it could last for a long time. If it was treated seriously, some uncontrollable things would happen in a short period of time. Some news from the Jing kingdom had just been placed on his desk. The investigation of officials in the capital city of the Jing kingdom involved a lot of people. It was very similar to the current Feng province. However, even the wise Emperor Jing could not solve the problem. After the chaos, there was no follow-up. Even the ruler of a country could not control it. It was obvious what happened to the eldest prince. In addition, there were some things that were a little difficult for him to understand. The scene was so similar, and the method was so similar. The secret agents of the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom tried their best, but they could not learn the legendary debit and credit method. How did it spread to the Qi kingdom? On the piece of paper that Money God of Fortune picked up, the words borrow and loan were clearly written. The Jing kingdom's arithmetic academy, the debit and credit method, the director Li Yi, the amazing poetry, the dragon jade pendant. These things were intertwined. In his heart, he was sure that the person he wanted to see was in the Qi kingdom, in the city of Feng province, in a place that he could not see. "Be careful, young master." A shout suddenly came from beside him. Zhao Yi raised his head and saw a huge object flying out from the shop next to him. Immediately, one of the shadow guards flew up, stepped on the object, and used his weapon to block it. Several men with their arms crossed ran out of the shop in a hurry. Then, several figures came out from inside. Zhao Yi looked over subconsciously. The one walking in front was a young man. His eyes stayed on the young man's face for a moment and then moved away. These things would be handled by someone. When he was about to leave, a voice came from beside him. "What's going on?" Zhao Zhang walked to the man who was stepped on by the guard and asked with a frown. Cousin brother, save me." The young man raised his head and immediately cried out when he saw Zhao Zheng. "Cousin brother?" Seeing the scene in front of him, Li Yi was also stunned. He whispered, "What's going on?" At this moment, the third prince, Zhao Yi, was shocked. He suddenly turned his head and looked somewhere. That guy just now actually had companions, and it seemed like there were quite a few of them. Li Yi glanced around, and when he saw a handsome young man in the crowd, his movements paused for a moment. Then, he continued to look at him as if nothing had happened. Zhao Yi's eyes stayed in one place for a long time before he moved away. There was a slightly disappointed expression on his face. "What's the matter with you?" The young man on the ground had been helped up. Zhao Zhang looked at him and asked with a frown. The young man rubbed a certain part of his body and said while gritting his teeth, This is a group of thugs. Cousin brother, I want to report them to the officials to arrest them." Zhao Zhang looked in the direction he was pointing at. When he saw the two women, he roughly understood what was going on. Before he could say anything, another figure walked over from the side. The old man called Zhang Yuanliang walked over and cupped his hands in salute. When he was about to bow, Zhao Zheng waved his hand and said, "Dispense with the formalities. Don't reveal our identities." Zhao Zheng frowned again. He knew very well what kind of person this cousin brother of his was. This journey was supposed to bring him to gain more experience, but he had been womanizing and had caused a lot of trouble. He could show himself in other places, but this was Feng Province. Any mistake would be used against him. For example, Zhao Yi and the censor in front of him, who had not been very willing to cooperate with him before. He looked at the young man and said, "Be obedient and go back to the relay station." After being glared at by him, the young man immediately retracted his head and said no more. Seeing Zhao Yi look over, Zhao Zheng shook his head and said, "It's just a misunderstanding. Let's go." The third prince, Zhao Yi, nodded. He looked in a certain direction again and turned to leave. "Are you all right?" Lin Wanru walked up to him and asked with concern when she saw that the people had left quickly. She was still a little shocked when she recalled the scene when he had thrown the man away with one hand. It was really hard to imagine that he looked so weak, but he had such terrifying strength. "I'm fine." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Let's go." He was still a little surprised. They had not seen each other for a long time, but he had recognized the young man at first glance. The young man who had been looking at him for a long time was the third prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Yi. The man beside him who had whispered to the censor not to reveal their identities should be the first prince of the Qi kingdom. Who would have thought that the rumored first prince would actually be such a sensible person? About 10 steps away, the first prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Zheng, and the young man were a few steps behind Zhao Yi. Zhao Zheng looked at him and said in a low voice, "After I'm done with my business, I'll make arrangements for you. When that time comes, you can do whatever you want with those two women. These days are special, so you'd better know your place." "I understand." Although the young man's eyes were filled with reluctance, he still lowered his head and said. Li Yi turned his head and pointed in a certain direction. He asked the slovenly old man, "What did he say?" "I didn't hear him clearly." Su looked at him strangely, then turned to look at Lin Wanru and Mississippi Lu. He peeled a white rabbit creamy candy and popped it into his mouth. Chapter 701. Although there were some unpleasant interludes during this shopping trip, fortunately, they were all resolved satisfactorily. Lin Wanru gave the bottle of perfume to second Miss Lu. Beside her, Lin Yong muttered in a low voice. This 2 taels of perfume was extremely expensive. His wife had been talking about it for half a month. Yesterday, he really couldn't stand it anymore, so he bought her a bottle. Lin Yong would feel uncomfortable if he didn't talk to others. He just needed to listen. Thinking of something, Li Yi turned to look at Lin Wanru and asked, "Isn't the conflict between the first prince and the third prince irreconcilable?" "It doesn't seem to be the case." "Are the rumors wrong?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked doubtfully, "When did you see the first prince and the third prince?" Li Yi pointed in a certain direction and said, "Just now, the young man who passed by the perfume shop was the third prince." "Didn't you see him?" Lin Wanru was startled and asked in surprise, "That was the third prince?" Li Yi was even more surprised. "You don't know the third prince?" Lin Wanru looked at him with a hint of doubt on her face and asked, "Although the third prince has been in Feng Province for more than 10 years, he has never officially shown his face. Even some officials in Feng Province City don't know what he looks like. How do you know him?" Li Yi was startled, then looked at him and asked doubtfully, "He has never shown his face?" "No." Li Yi thought for a moment and said with a smile, "The third prince went to the capital of the Jing kingdom last time. I saw him from afar and he looked very similar to the young man just now. However, it might not be him. Does the third prince have a twin brother?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I've never heard of it." "Then I might have seen wrongly." Li Yi turned his head and looked around. He pointed to a shop not far away and said, "There's a cloth shop over there. Let's go and see if they have any new fabrics. The weather is good today, and the clouds in the sky are so white. It's a good time to buy 2 bolts of fabric. The weather is not bad, the clouds are so white, buying fabric." Looking at Li Yi who was striding forward, Lin Yong scratched his head and asked in surprise, "Does this matter?" "Let's go," Lin Wanru said in a low voice. When she raised her head to look at the figure in front of her again, a trace of doubt appeared in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. She shook her head and strode forward. One should not be afraid of a thief stealing, but one should be afraid of a thief remembering. Of all people, it had to be Lin Wanru and Mississippi Lu. This was the Qi Kingdom, and there were many things that he could not directly intervene in. Since he already knew that Lin Wanru would face some unknown dangers in the future, he could not pretend that he did not know and just walk away. The first prince, right? Very busy recently, right? Then continue to be busy. It was good to be busy, to be busy. Li Yi stood at the door of a shop and rubbed the space between his brows out of habit. As he was worrying about the feudal construction of the Qi Kingdom, an old man came up to him and asked in a low voice, "Young master, may I disturb you for a moment?" Li Yi looked at the old man. He was dressed in Confucian robes and had a small book in his hand. A bamboo tube hung at his waist. Other than his appearance, he looked different from the old man just now. It was as if he had come from the same production line. Yi Fuqian sighed and asked, "What is it?" The old man looked at him and said, "The first prince has led a group of imperial censors to investigate the corrupt officials in Feng province. There has been quite a commotion these days. I wonder what this young master thinks of this matter?" He went straight to the point. It was the same straightforwardness, the same simple brutality. Li Yi took a deep breath and asked, "Can I curse?" The old man glanced at him and said with a frown, "How can a scholar speak dirty words?" "Then I have no opinion." Li Yi waved his hand and pointed somewhere. He said, "There is a tea stall in front. There are many people there. Do you want to go there and ask?" Lin Yong walked in front with a lot of things in his arms. Li Yi and the sloppy old man followed behind Mississippi Lu and Lin Wanru. Feng province was not peaceful these days. It was unexpected to meet two imperial censors in plain clothes on the same street. From the analysis of the situation, the relationship between the first prince and the third prince was far from good enough for them to go shopping together. On the surface, it was a fake brotherly love. Who knew how they would stab each other in the back? Li Yi turned to look at the sloppy old man and asked, "Su, do you have anything to do tonight?" The sloppy old man glanced at him and shook his head. "No." Li Yi nodded and said, "That's good. Your body has not recovered yet. You need to take care of your injuries. If there is nothing important, try not to make trouble." The sloppy old man looked at him and asked, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "No." "Really?" The sloppy old man asked doubtfully. "I really didn't." Li Yi nodded. In the courtyard next a fragrant forest garden. "Be careful." Li Yi patted the sloppy old man's shoulder, put an envelope in his hand, and said. The sloppy old man nodded. When he turned around he asked, "Do you need me to bring back the head of the first prince?" "No, no." Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand and said, "It's good that the thing has been delivered. You don't need to bring anything back." After all, this was the Qi Kingdom. If the first prince's head was cut off in someone else's territory, wouldn't the entire Fengzhou city be turned upside down? At that time, no one would be able to leave the city. The entire Fengzhou city would be turned upside down. No matter how powerful a grandmaster was, he would not be able to take him and Mississippi Lu away. No, forget it. When the sloppy old man's voice rang out, he had already disappeared from the courtyard. Mississippi Lu walked out of the room and asked, "Who were you talking to outside just now?" "No one." Li Yi waved his hand and walked into the room. As he walked he said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early. You have to go to work tomorrow." In a heavily guarded courier station in Fengzhou City. "Your Highness, the name list of all the people found these days is all here." An official put a thin booklet on the table. After saluting, he slowly left. Zhao Zheng picked up the booklet and casually flipped through it while pacing in the room. 53 people. He looked at a certain number written on the booklet and a smile appeared on his face. Over the past few days, a total of 53 officials in Fengzhou had been found to have committed serious corruption. Not to mention how many of Zhao Yi's trusted subordinates were among them. How many of his people could be placed in these 53 positions if he fought for them? In this way, he would have more control over Fengzhou. In the future, no matter what Zhao Yi did, he would be able to keep an eye on it. If he could dig deeper into this matter and strike while the iron was hot, he could completely replace Zhao Yi and become the ruler of Fengzhou and the neighboring provinces. In that case, Zhao Yi would be like an eagle without wings. How could he fight against him? For him, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Whether or not he could grasp it and change the impression that the people and the court officials had of him and Zhao Yi, the following days were very important. He had to produce more results. After reading the booklet from beginning to end, Zhao Jing nodded and murmured, "Not bad. The wine is good, but the chicken is too old." A voice suddenly came from the room. "Who is it?" Zhao Zheng's expression changed. He suddenly turned his head and saw an old man with messy hair and a black cloth covering his face sitting at the table. The old man pointed at a dish on the table with his chopsticks and shook his head. "Who made this poached chicken? It's such a waste of good ingredients. He deserves to be beaten." Chapter 702. Who are you? How did you get in here? Zhao Zheng asked coldly as he slowly moved towards the door, a look of extreme vigilance on his face. There were 500 guards outside the relay station, and all around the room were his personal guards. He really could not figure out how this old man managed to break through the guards and get in here. The masked old man swung his hand, and the chopsticks in his hand shot out. They brushed past Zhao Zheng's eyes and sank deep into the doorframe. He looked at this prince of the Qi kingdom and said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." Looking at the two easily broken jade chopsticks, which were inserted about an inch above the doorframe, Zhao Jing knew that it was no longer important how the other party managed to get into this courtyard under the heavy guards. What was important was that if the jade chopsticks could be inserted into the doorframe, they could naturally be inserted into Zhao Zheng's head, heart, or any other place. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, they had regained their indifference. He walked over and cupped his hands towards the masked old man, saying, "I was impolite just now. May I know what senior has come to visit me in the middle of the night?" Since the other party had such terrifying strength, but did not kill him immediately, it meant that the old man was not here to kill him. In that case, everything could be discussed. The masked old man took a sip of wine, then looked at him and asked, "I heard that you've obtained a wonderful method these days, and you're using that method to investigate cases and catch corrupt officials?" Zhao Zheng raised his eyebrows. For a moment, he did not know the old man's true intentions. Was there someone on the list that he cared about, or was it because this matter had touched upon some of his interests? He looked at the old man and said tentatively, "If this matter has offended Senior, I apologize to Senior. If Senior has any requests, Zhao Zheng will certainly do his best to satisfy them." Smack! The masked old man suddenly slammed the table, making a crisp sound. It also made Zhao Zheng's heart tighten. The masked old man raised his eyebrows, looked at him and said coldly, "Do you know that the method is called the debit bookkeeping method, which is a secret that my sect has spent 30 years to develop? But it was stolen by a traitor. When I chased after the traitor, I found that this thing was actually obtained by you. Tell me, where did you get this method?" Hearing this, Zhao Zheng was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately realized something. As expected, the god of wealth was just a lowly merchant. How could he come up with such a wonderful method? He must have gotten it from somewhere, taken it for himself, and then claimed credit in front of him. How could such a clumsy method be hidden from him? Zhao Zheng seemed to have seen through everything. He cupped his fists at the old man and said apologetically, "Senior, I'm really sorry. I really didn't know. This is a secret of your sect. Please forgive me, Senior. I'm willing to make it up to you. Is there anything I can do for Senior?" At this moment, what he was most afraid of was that this old man's martial arts was extraordinarily high, but he was stubborn and had no interest in money or power. As long as the old man had a request, he would be safe. "Shut up. I'm not a man who covets power and wealth. I know that you're the first prince of the Qi kingdom, but you can't humiliate me like this." Smack! Said the masked old man coldly. He slammed his palm on the table again, causing Zhao Zheng's heart to skip a beat. He subconsciously wanted to shout out loud, "Here!" The masked old man took out something wrapped in black cloth from his bosom and handed it to Zhao Zheng. Zhao Zheng's mouth was half open, and his back was wet with cold sweat. His heart was tangled up, but when he saw that the old man only handed him something, he was stunned for a moment. After a long time, seeing that the old man really had no intention of killing him, he finally relaxed. He asked carefully, "Senior, what is this?" The masked old man said slowly, "My whole sect has devoted 30 years of study to develop this secret method. My purpose was to present it to the imperial court, to eliminate the corrupt officials of the Qi kingdom, and to restore peace to the world. However, I didn't expect that there would be a traitor in my sect, and the secret method was stolen. I was worried that the method would be used by other countries, so I chased after them. I heard about this just as I arrived in Fengzhou. Zhao Zhang was stunned again and asked, "Senior, you mean? You did a good job. You eliminated the corrupt officials without any leniency. What you did was for the good of the country and the people. I've seen it all these days." The masked old man stood up, patted him on the shoulder and said, "What the traitor stole was only an incomplete part of the first part of the secret method. What's inside is the entire secret method. I'm passing it to you now, in the hope that you will keep your original heart in the future. Don't give up because of those with ulterior motives, and don't disappoint me and my sect. If the corrupt officials are not eliminated, the people will never have a day of peace." The turn of events was too sudden, and Zhao Zhang could not react for a moment. The assassin who attacked the courier station at night suddenly became selfless for the country and the people. He needed time to digest this. "Thank you, Senior. Zhao Zhang will not let you down." Very quickly, Zhao Zhang understood that he had hit the jackpot today. If a mere fragment of the first half could have such an effect, wouldn't he be able to move unhindered in the imperial court if he could obtain the complete first and second half? Although he did not know which sect this old man belonged to, the person who could research this method must not be ordinary. Maybe there was something more powerful in it. If he could get it. The masked old man said in a deep voice, "This is the complete debit and credit bookkeeping method, as well as a wonderful way to govern the country and fill the national treasury. You must take good care of it and remember not to spread it. If other countries get it, the consequences will be unimaginable." Zhao Zhang was delighted, but a solemn expression appeared on his face. He nodded and said, "Senior, don't worry. After looking at it, I will completely burn it without leaving a trace." The old man nodded and asked, "Now tell me, where did you get this method?" Zhao Zhang replied without hesitation, "Fortune god of money, the fortune god of money in Fengzhou. This method was given by him." "Fortune god of money." The masked old man nodded and said, "The thing has been delivered. I will leave now. I hope you won't let me down." Zhao Zhang hurriedly said, "I still don't know your name, Senior. You have done a great service to the Qi Kingdom. Please leave your name. In the future, Zhao Zhang will write a book and erect a monument for you so that the people can admire you." "Ha ha ha, I have done my best for the country. How can I, Su Tian, be a vulgar person who does good deeds and leaves my name everywhere?" The old man laughed and said, "Farewell, we will never meet again." He waved his sleeves and the door opened. Zhao Zhang blinked, but there was no one at the door. Zhao Zhang walked out quickly. A guard immediately came over and bowed. "Your Highness, what can I do for you?" Zhao Zhang looked at them and asked, "Did you see anyone leave my room?" The two guards looked at each other and shook their heads. They said, "No, only your Highness." "All right, there is nothing else. You can leave. In a quarter of an hour, tell the guard in charge of the relay station to see me." Zhao Zhang waved at them and went back to his room. When he walked inside, he saw an item wrapped in black cloth on the table. There was an unconcealable fire in his eyes. Chapter 703. Inside the room, Zhao Zhang slowly opened up the black cloth, revealing the item inside. It was a bright yellow piece of silk. It looked a little old and should have been around for quite some time. There were some words on the silk. Zhao Zhang slowly unfolded it. It was written in an upright script that he had never seen before. Just by looking at the handwriting, he could tell that the person who wrote on the silk was not an ordinary person. The words were not on paper, but on the silk. It was really puzzling. However, it also made him pay more attention to the content on the silk. Zhao Zhang carefully moved the oil lamp on the table closer to him. He looked at the piece of silk with rapt attention. His face sometimes showed doubt, sometimes he showed a look of understanding. Sometimes he frowned, and sometimes he relaxed. Finally, he slowly stood up and opened the door. He said, "Invite the censors in. Your Highness, a few of the officials are already asleep. Wake them all up." Zhao Zhang waved his hand and said, "Tell them that I have something important to discuss with them." "Yes, Your Highness." The guard quickly got up and ran away. Not long after, many of the lights in the relay station that had been out for a long time were lit up again. May I know why your highness has summoned us so late at night? Nearly 10 censors rushed over. Some of them didn't even have time to tidy up their robes. They tied up their sleeves and asked. Zhao Zheng looked at the burnt silk in the bowl on the table. He turned around and said, "For the past few days, I have been working day and night. I have made some improvements to the debit and credit method. I have added and deleted several times to make it more convenient to use. From tomorrow onwards, you will use this new method to investigate." He handed a piece of paper over to the censor in front of him. After the censor received the paper, he saw the crisscrossed lines of rules and regulations drawn on it. His expression was one of astonishment. After staring at it for a long time, a look of surprise and joy appeared on his face. He looked at Zhao Zheng and praised, "Your Highness is indeed a genius. With this, when we check the accounts, all the items will be clear and concise. It will greatly increase the speed of our work and provide us with great convenience." Hearing the censor's words, Zhao Zheng nodded slightly. He didn't know where the nameless old man came from. He naturally wouldn't believe what he said. At that time, he only wanted to save his life. There was an element of hypocrisy in it. But when he saw the first page of the silk, his thoughts immediately changed. The method recorded on it was exactly the same as the censor's, but it was more detailed. The god of wealth didn't tell them some of the methods. It was obvious that the method they used was derived from the old man's. But it was not complete. At this point, he believed most of the old man's words. After sorting out his thoughts, he couldn't help but feel high-spirited. A master who was so skilled in martial arts came to visit in the middle of the night just to pass on this wonderful method to him. Among the many princes of the Qi kingdom, who else had the same treatment as him? A master was indeed a master. His ability to discern the pearls was something that ordinary people could never hope to achieve in their entire lives. "Your Highness is brilliant. If this method is really implemented in the future, your Highness will take credit for it." When several censors in the crowd were flattering him, Zhao Zheng waved his hand and said, "Other than that, I have another matter to discuss with you." "Your Highness, please speak your mind. I'm all ears." Zhao Zheng thought for a moment and said, "Recently, I've been supervising the various prefectures. I've obtained the secret method of borrowing money from Feng province. I've investigated the accounts of the various prefectures and have made great gains. I've arrested 53 officials. However, the number of corrupt officials among them is different, so we can't punish all of them. Those who have committed minor crimes don't need to be demoted or punished. They can be ordered to pay money to pay for their crimes, and the money will be returned to the national treasury and the palace. What do you think?" The crowd of censors raised their heads to look at him, and their faces were filled with shock. Paying for a crime with money was something that had never happened before. It only took a little thought to know that it involved a lot of things, and it couldn't be spoken carelessly. "Your Highness, I think that this method must not be used." One of the censors thought for a moment and said through gritted teeth, "This method goes against the law and will cause the country's laws to collapse. We must not." As censors, they were instinctively sensitive to certain things. They instinctively felt that this was not appropriate. "I'm afraid that Censor Wei is exaggerating." Zhao Zheng glanced at him and said, "In recent years, the national treasury has been empty, and the inner government is short of money. We can only do what we want now. Although this method has a certain amount of risk, as long as we control it well, it is a wonderful method that can fill up the national treasury. Does Imperial Censor Wei have a better method?" "I know." Censor Wei opened his mouth, looked at him, and immediately retreated without saying another word. The Daqi kingdom had been at war for many years, and the national treasury had long been overwhelmed. This had been a headache for the emperor and the court officials, and it had never been solved. It could be foreseen that if this method was implemented, the national treasury would expand at a terrifying speed, and there would be no more worries about a lack of silver. Moreover, this method was very suitable for the current situation. The censors were supervising the prefectures and assessing the officials. Some officials were corrupt, some were ineffective, and some had flaws in their style of work. There would always be some small problems in all aspects, but they were harmless and difficult to measure. If they weren't punished, it would be conniving, and they didn't know how to punish them. If they could all be converted into silver, it would be much more convenient. However, if this was the case, wouldn't it make some officials fearless and worsen their corruption? This was like walking on a steel cable, and below it was a cliff tens of thousands of feet high. If they could safely walk over, they would be greeted with cheers, but if there was the slightest mistake, they would be consigned to eternal damnation, and their bones would be crushed. Before this, there had never been a dynasty that had implemented such a method. Whether it would be applauded or crushed, they could only try it themselves. One of the censors thought about it, and a conflicted expression appeared on his face. He stood up and said, "Your Highness." Zhao Jing looked at him coldly and asked, "Censor Shen, do you have any objections?" Seeing the great prince's expression, everyone's heart shook. They knew that this time, the great prince had most likely hardened his heart to implement this method. The problem of the national treasury had always been the emperor's sore point. If there was a way to solve this problem once and for all, there would be no more worries. Even if they had to pay a small price, they believed that the emperor would not refuse. For the great prince, this was also a rare opportunity. Once he could personally take charge of this matter, in the future, all the officials in the world would have to act according to his wishes. On one hand, he could receive the emperor's attention, and on the other, he could establish his prestige in front of the officials. If someone disagreed with him on this matter, the outcome would be very tragic. Censor Shen opened his mouth and swallowed the words he was about to say. He bowed and said, "Your Highness is wise." One of the censors asked, "Your Highness, does this method have a name?" Zhao Zheng thought about it and said, "Let's call it silver for discussing crimes." Inside the room, Li Yi looked at the old bedsheet that was missing a piece and blew out the oil lamp. Today, he had bought 2 rolls of cloth. Tomorrow, he would cut out a new bedsheet. The bedsheet was missing a piece, and it looked really awkward. Chapter 704. That night, at King Feng's residence. "Your Highness, we can't let them go on like this. The officials of several provinces are complaining, and the people's grievances are increasing every day. I'm afraid that Feng Province, which we have been managing for so long, will be destroyed in their hands." The person who spoke was the provincial governor of Feng Province. He was pacing back and forth anxiously in his room. According to the plan, the first prince's actions in Feng Province should have reached the capital by now and caused a huge reaction. If they were to hurry, there should be a reply after such a long time. However, the reply didn't come. The increasingly unscrupulous imperial censors had caused an impact that couldn't be ignored in Feng Province. In the face of the first prince's deliberate targeting, if they continued to sit back and do nothing, there would be some irreparable losses. Zhao Yi heard this and frowned slightly. Although the other party's actions in Feng Province were related to the personal grudge between him and the first prince, it was an official matter on the surface. If he obstructed them, he would definitely become a laughingstock. The imperial censors had always been merciless and couldn't be ignored. He couldn't advance or retreat. A helpless expression appeared on Zhao Yi's face as he muttered, Brother Li, you have given me a difficult problem this time." The provincial governor of Feng Province looked at him and asked doubtfully, "What did your Highness say?" "Nothing." Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Provincial Governor Zhou, you can go back first. I have my own arrangements for this matter." The middle-aged man nodded and left the room. Zhao Yi walked over. Just as she was about to close the door, she suddenly heard a sound like silk tearing, followed by a bang. He turned his head and saw a dagger inserted straight into the door, all the way to the hilt. A trace of doubt appeared on Zhao Yi's face. He took out a handkerchief from his bosom and held the hilt. He didn't use much strength and easily pulled out the dagger. It was obvious that it was an extremely sharp weapon. "Who is it?" Zhao Yi stood at the door and looked into the courtyard. He asked loudly. There was no response for a long time. He waved at the guard who was walking towards him and walked into the room. He took out a few pieces of paper from the dagger and carefully placed the dagger on the table. He didn't know who could sneak into the prince's mansion and deliver a message with a dagger, but the content of the message should be very important. Silver. But when he saw the first sentence written on the paper, he frowned. As time passed, the expression on his face first became solemn, then puzzled, surprised, and finally stunned. What was written on it was a system called Silver for Trial of Crimes. As the name suggested, the content of the system was to pay for crimes with money. Depending on the severity of the crime committed by the officials, they would be exempted from certain punishments by a certain amount of silver. Although this law could solve the country's financial problems in a short period of time, in the long run, Corruption would inevitably spread to the point where it could not be suppressed, and the country would not be far from destruction. What was strange was that these pieces of paper described in detail the evils of the silver for trial of crimes. They quoted scriptures and discussed the major crimes committed by the silver for trial of crimes. For example, using money to pay for crimes would make the officials who paid the silver for trial of crimes even more unbridled and fearless, and the officials would become more corrupt. With the silver for trial of crimes, the officials would exploit the people even more, and the country would be in turmoil. Finally, using money to pay for crimes would not be pursued, and the law would become useless. The law would collapse, and the country would perish. Of course, more importantly, it was clearly written on the paper that the eldest prince was going to vigorously implement the silver for trial of crime system. This was simply encouraging evil practices and promoting unhealthy practices, with the intention of destroying the Qi kingdom. The person who wrote this letter was originally an expert who wandered around the world. He was unwilling to see the state of Qi destroyed in the hands of such a person. Thus, he sent a letter with a dagger to expose the matter. He hoped that he could announce this matter to the world and let everyone see the ugly face of the first prince. Zhao Yi put down the letter and sat by the table. His right index finger tapped on the surface of the table. If this matter was true and the eldest prince really wanted to implement this method of destroying the country, then he would have a good reason to do so. He would not need to care about the censors and the opinions of the people in the capital, and the siege of Feng province would be resolved. The problem was, who had sent this letter? How did he find out about this matter? And how did he enter the prince's residence? No matter what, he would not believe the words of a wandering expert. Who could it be? Zhao Yi's index finger tapped on the surface of the table a little faster as he murmured. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Zhao Yi got up and walked to the door. He asked, "What is it?" "I forgot something." An old voice rang out, and the door bolt broke. Zhao Yi saw a masked old man with white hair walk in. He walked to the side of the table and put away the dagger. When he walked out of the door, he glanced at Zhao Yi and casually stuck the other dagger into the door. He said, "It's a little dark, so I stuck it in the wrong place. Sorry." Zhao Yi watched him walk into the courtyard. With a leap, he flew up to the roof and completely disappeared into the night. "There's an assassin! There's an assassin!" Panicked footsteps could be heard nearby. Countless figures ran over. "Your Highness, is Your Highness all right? Where did the assassin go? Catch the assassin! Catch the assassin!" A moment later, Zhao Yi dismissed the crowd and asked, "Is anyone injured?" One person immediately replied, "Your Highness, only a few guards were knocked unconscious. No one was injured." Zhao Yi nodded and looked at the dagger on the door. He walked over, grabbed the handle, and exerted a little force. The dagger did not move at all. Thinking of how the old man had cut the dagger like it was tofu, Zhao Yi asked, "Did anything happen at the relay station tonight?" Someone walked up and bowed, saying, "Your Highness, the first prince gathered everyone in the middle of the night. He seemed to be discussing something important." Zhao Yi nodded and pulled out the dagger with all his might. Then he walked into the house. "In the future, double the number of people in this area." Someone bowed. "As you command." At the same time, at the Feng province relay station, a few people knelt down in the corridor, trembling with fear. Zhao Jing pointed at them and said coldly, "It's useless. You don't even know that someone has barged in. I have raised a bunch of trash for nothing." It was another sunny day. Li Yi got up and opened the door. When he was stretching his body in the courtyard, a figure flew out from a room in the inn next door and landed steadily in the courtyard. The unkempt old man looked at him and said, "The 2 items have been delivered." "And?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. The unkempt old man nodded and said, "I've made myself clear." As he said this, he could not help but take another look at Li Yi. To be able to praise one person to the heavens and belittle the same thing to the ground in front of another person were 2 extremes. Perhaps only a scholar could do such a thing. Li Yi cupped his hands at him and said, "Su, thank you for your hard work." The unkempt old man shook his head and asked, "When are we going back?" "Soon. It'll only take a while." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Why? Is Su in a hurry to go back because of something important?" The unkempt old man touched his chest pocket. During the battle with the Taoist nun, a bottle of antidote had been accidentally destroyed. That was 2 months' worth of antidote. If he returned late, his limbs would be stiff and he would be bleeding from all 7 apertures. Calculating the days, the unkempt old man should still be able to make it. He shook his head and said, "What important matter could I have? No hurry, no hurry." Chapter 705. The sloppy old man's appearance was not very glorious. He acted as if he was a grandmaster and that he could be unreasonable just because he was a grandmaster. Li Yi did not have a good first impression of him. But later, he found that he had misunderstood him. At the Heroes' Assembly, he did not hesitate to be seriously injured to clear all the obstacles for Mississippi Lu. He eliminated all the masters, including the Taoist nun, so that Mississippi Lu could easily become the leader of Wulin. Who was it? This time, he and Mississippi Lu traveled thousands of miles to the Qi Kingdom. They were tired and rushed all the way. They were injured again and severely injured the Taoist nun. Who was it that gave him and Mississippi Lu a chance to escape? They came to the Qi Kingdom alone and without help. Who was it that followed them all the way? When he encountered difficulties and it was inconvenient for him to help, who stepped forward? As a guru respected by all in Wulin, he did not have the dignity and arrogance of a guru at all. He did so much for a person he did not have much friendship with. It was hard for Li Yi to imagine what kind of selfless spirit he had. If everyone could be like him, selfless and dedicated to helping others, the world would have been really unified. Li Yi silently apologized to the sloppy old man for his previous mistake. He knocked on a tree in the yard. After a moment, he heard a sound of air breaking. The sloppy old man descended from the sky and appeared in front of him. He looked at Li Yi and asked with a serious face, "What happened?" "Nothing. Nothing." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I've cooked a lot of food today. Sue hasn't eaten yet, right? Come and eat with us." The sloppy old man was stunned. Then he shook his head and said, "No, Here." Li Yi handed him a pair of chopsticks and said, "Sit for a while. There's still one dish left in the pot. I'll go and get it." After serving Mississippi Lu's food, Li Yi came out and sat at the table in the yard. He chatted with the sloppy old man while eating. "By the way, I heard that the courier station was heavily guarded. Did anything happen yesterday?" The sloppy old man peeled a prawn and threw it into his mouth. He said disdainfully, "It's not because there are many people but because it's heavily guarded. They're just a bunch of chickens and dogs. I can go in and out of that courier station in broad daylight without being discovered. However, there are a few guys in King Feng's mansion. If it wasn't night, there might be some trouble." Li Yi realized that he was liking this elder Su more and more. Although he was a little sloppy, he was highly skilled in martial arts. He was reliable, had integrity. In this day and age, it was hard to find a grandmaster, and it was even harder to find a grandmaster with such a noble character. The hole had been dug last night. The seed had been planted. As for what kind of fruit it would bear in the end, it would depend on the will of the heavens. If the will of the heavens did not satisfy him, he would often loosen the soil, fertilize it, and water it to guide the will of the heavens in the right direction. The debit and credit method was only the first step. Since he was going to do it, he should do it fully. How could one more step be less? To be honest, the third prince, Zhao Yi, was very sincere to him. However, when he arrived at the Qi Kingdom, Feng Province, and Zhao Yi's territory, he did not even want to see him. If he put himself in Zhao Yi's shoes, he would be very disappointed. He would not have any friends if he behaved like this. This time, he was giving him a big gift as an apology. He was so smart. He should be able to seize the opportunity, right? In King Feng's mansion, Zhao Yi sat on the main seat. There was an ordinary dagger on the table beside him. "Your Highness, we've sinned." A few figures stepped forward and said in unison, "Master, you don't have to do this." Zhao Yi hurried forward and helped the old monk in the front stand up. He said, "The person who visited last night had unfathomable martial arts. Even you didn't notice him. I'm afraid he has already entered the Grandmaster realm. If he wants to come, we can't stop him." Amit Ba. The old monk chanted the name of Buddha and said, "Grandmasters are as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. There's only one in the palace who doesn't come out for a long time. Most of the others are also traveling the world. Their whereabouts are uncertain. Why did they appear in Feng province and break into the mansion at night? Zhao Yi lowered his head and thought for a moment. At this moment, he began to believe that the old man yesterday was really a master who traveled the world. A grandmaster's step is a different world. If he really is a grandmaster, I'm afraid we won't be his match even if we join forces. Only by gathering all the guards in the mansion can we guarantee your highness's safety. A scholar in Xi'an with a folding fan in his hand said, "Fortunately, he doesn't seem to have bad intentions towards your highness. Otherwise, he would have attacked last night." The few of them looked at each other and frowned. A grandmaster was an extremely unstable factor. Even the royal family of the Qi kingdom had only managed to recruit one to protect the emperor. There were only a few people who could be called grandmasters in the entire Qi kingdom. Furthermore, there was no news of any of them. No matter how much money was spent, it was impossible to recruit one. It was not a good thing to have a relationship with a grandmaster who was unknown to them. Although I don't know who he is, I don't think he's an enemy. Zhao Yi didn't care much about this. He turned his head and asked the person beside him, "Have you confirmed it at the courier station?" The person immediately said, "Just now, our people have sent news that the matter of discussing the silver of punishment is true. The first prince has already sent people to question the officials who were convicted. I think he's going to report this matter to the capital first. In addition, the censors have also left the courier station. I think they're going to Qing province." The expression of the scholar behind Zhao Yi changed. He said, "Qing province. They still want to make a move in Qing province. They've already caused chaos in Feng province. If they add Qing province to the mix, our losses will be too great." Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Go and invite Provincial Governor Zhou over." "Your Highness, could it be?" The person's face lit up. Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Go." "Yes, Your Highness." Not long after, a figure immediately rushed out of King Feng's residence. Not long after, another figure hurried in from outside. He didn't have time to greet Zhao Yi. He immediately asked, "Your Highness, have you made up your mind? In this case, there will be a lot of opposition in the imperial court." Zhao Yi smiled and handed him a few pieces of paper. He said, "Take a look at this first." Yang Yanzhou received it with some bewilderment. After flipping through it, he suddenly raised his head and said, "Silver of condemnation. Did the eldest prince really think of this? Could it be that he's crazy?" Zhao Yi thought about it and said, "The imperial treasury has always been a sore point for imperial father. If we can solve this problem and make some sacrifices, imperial father will definitely not oppose it. It's not surprising that he has this kind of idea. The corrupt officials will celebrate because of this, but the upright officials will definitely oppose the remonstrance of the officials." Yang Yanzhou waved the things in his hand and said, "It's written very clearly on these pieces of paper. Once the silver of condemnation is used, the Qi kingdom will not be far from destruction. If your highness presents this report, the eldest prince will definitely be attacked by everyone. Your highness's wisdom, Yanzhou, is far inferior." Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "I didn't think of this idea." "Then who is it?" Yang Yanzhou was stunned and asked doubtfully. Zhao Yi smiled and said, "An otherworldly master who likes to travel." He walked to the window and looked at the white clouds floating in the distant sky. He murmured, "Brother Li, thank you very much." "There's no need to thank me. It's nothing." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He said, "However, I still feel that this kind of semi-cursive script is not very suitable to be used as a signboard. Why don't you consider using regular script? It's upright and generous. It should be pretty good." Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "The last time I went to the Jing Kingdom, when I passed by Qing'an Prefecture, I saw a shop called Rui Workshop. It used this kind of writing style. I just don't know if the 3 words Fragrant Forest Park will have the same effect. I originally wanted to find the master who wrote the signboard, but I was pressed for time, so I gave up." "Is that so?" Li Yi thought about it and said, "It's fine. I'm familiar with that master. It should be similar to the 3 words Rui Workshop. Do you have any other requests?" Chapter 706. Perhaps Lin Wanru had made great progress in calligraphy recently and had a higher standard, so she didn't like the plaque of Fonglin Garden no matter how she looked at it. In addition, Fonglin Garden was about to enter the next 3-year plan, which was to become the largest jewelry store in Fengzhou within 3 years. A new plaque and a new atmosphere. From today on, a new Fonglin Garden would appear in the eyes of the people in Fengzhou. The place was still the same, and the staff was still the same, but the things were no longer the same. The old styles had all been removed from the shelves, and the new jewelry in the store was the most popular new products in the fashion capital of the Jing Kingdom. There were even a few glass jewelry, which were of good quality and cheap, worthy of the trust of the majority of women. There were a variety of styles, a variety of choices, for friends, lovers, wives, mothers. Fonglin Garden met all the needs of the customers. In fact, quality is important, but feelings can't be neglected. What kind of story does the Black Swan have? Why did the previous owners of the Desert Star have the same fate? Why can wearing the heart of the ocean bring happiness? Don't underestimate these things. These can have a huge impact on the sales. Li Yi wrote and said to Lin Wanru. Looking at the days, he knew that he wouldn't be staying here for too long. He wanted to make some plans for the Lin family so that they wouldn't waste their time taking care of him. Lin Wanru wrote these down, glanced at him, and asked, "Do you also run a business in the Jing Kingdom?" Li Yi nodded and said, "A small business. It's all for a living." Thinking of something, Lin Wanru said, "If the people we met yesterday were really the third prince and the first prince, then the person you taught a lesson to shouldn't have a simple background. If you go out in the next 2 days, be careful." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "He won't do anything to the Lin family, will he?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "The Lin family runs a decent business, so I'm not afraid of them." It had to be said that Zhao Yi was really a very powerful person. The most direct manifestation was that the people of Fengzhou were very confident, including the businessmen. If he couldn't even grasp this opportunity, it would be too disappointing. While he was talking to Lin Wanru, he suddenly heard a series of orderly footsteps. The pedestrians on the street automatically dispersed, and the vendors on both sides of the street quickly removed the things that might block the road. Groups of armored soldiers with weapons in their hands and expressionless faces quickly crossed the street. Li Yi roughly estimated their numbers and estimated that there were at least 1,000 of them. Lin Wanru's expression changed slightly as she asked, "There are so many guards. What happened?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "As I said, Feng province is good everywhere, but the security is really not good." At the Fengzhou courier station, Zhao Zheng looked at the booklet his subordinate had just sent over with a look of realization on his face. He asked in disbelief, "Are there really that many?" Someone immediately replied, "Your Highness, we've already calculated it several times. The numbers are correct." "All right, you can leave now." Zhao Zheng waved his hand and sat back in his chair. After drinking a cup of tea, he suppressed the shock in his heart. 53 people were willing to hand over so much silver in order to be absolved of their crimes. If this number was added to the other provinces, or even the entire Qi kingdom, how much silver would it be? In this way, the national treasury would only become more and more abundant from now on, and there would never be a time when it would be empty. Once this method was implemented, the national treasury's worries would be solved. Of course, although he was a prince, it was impossible for him to implement this law without the consent of his father. All he had to do was submit a memorial to his father and report the whole matter to him. Then, the matter of the silver for discussing the crime would definitely fall on his head. At that time, which official in the world wouldn't act according to his wishes? Zhao Zheng picked up his teacup again and sneered. "Haha, with the help of such an expert, Zhao Yi. Oh, Zhao Yi, what do you have to fight against me?" As soon as he finished speaking, the door to the room was suddenly pushed open. A man said in panic, "Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness, bad news." Zhao Zheng was so shocked that he spat out a mouthful of tea. After wiping his mouth in a panic, he immediately put on a cold face and said angrily, "Whose bad news?" The official who came in realized that what he had just said was somewhat disrespectful to His Highness. He hurriedly said, "Your Highness, the censors and their entourage who went to Qing province were arrested by the third prince as soon as they left the city gates." "What?" Upon hearing this, Zhao Zheng was shocked. Then, instead of being angry, he said happily, "Is what you said true? The censors were arrested by the third prince?" "Yes." The official immediately nodded and said, "Just now, everyone was sent back. Come, let's go out and take a look." I want to see what he wants this time. Zhao Zheng's face revealed a trace of a cold smile. Zhao Yi didn't make any strange movements. He felt that he had punched the air and felt a bit sullen. Now that he had arrested the censors, he was obstructing official business. This was defying the will of the imperial court and his father. He wanted to see what else Zhao Yi had to say. Just as he took a step forward, another person ran in and said in panic, "Your Highness, bad news! Your Highness!" Zhao Zheng's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and said, "If it's because of the censors again, go and receive 50 strokes of the rod." "This time it's not." The person's face turned pale and said, The third prince and the Feng province's provincial governor have surrounded this place with the guards." "What?" This time, Zhao Zheng's expression changed greatly. He blurted out, "What is he trying to do? Is he trying to rebel?" Outside the relay station, the Feng province's provincial governor rode on his horse and said, "Your Highness, this time, we have no path of retreat." Zhao Yi turned his head and glanced at him. He smiled and said, "No matter, Lord Zhou can just watch." Zhao Zheng walked out of the relay station with a gloomy expression. He looked at the guards surrounding this place and gritted his teeth. "Zhou Xingping, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to rebel?" "Your Highness has misunderstood." Provincial Governor Zhou dismounted from his horse and said, "This official heard that someone wants to carry out a law to discuss crimes and bring chaos to the foundation of our Qi kingdom. I didn't dare to be negligent and specially brought people to seek confirmation from your Highness. Dare I ask your Highness, is there such a thing? Bring people to seek confirmation?" Zhao Zheng looked at the 1,000 guards surrounding him and the anger on his face intensified. He asked, "Are you here to seek confirmation or to denounce?" Zhao Yi dismounted from his horse and said, "This matter is of great importance and concerns the foundation of our Qi kingdom. It is normal for Provincial Governor Zhou to be serious. Imperial brother, don't be angry." Zhao Zheng raised his head and looked at him. A provincial governor didn't have the guts to bring people to surround the imperial censor and the prince. Wasn't the mastermind behind this all him, Zhao Yi? This is a relay station. There are over 10 imperial censors from the imperial censorate, officials of the capital, and even I are here. How dare you all? He coldly harumphed and turned to walk inside. He coldly said, "If you all have the guts, then come in. After I return to the capital, I will definitely report this matter to His Majesty. For obstructing the imperial censors, the one with the surname Zhou, be careful of your head." Seeing the first imperial prince walk in and the door of the relay station closed, Provincial Governor Zhou turned his head and looked at the third imperial prince. He asked, "Your Highness, this?" Zhao Yi smiled and said, "Let's wait for a while." Who exactly was the one who leaked this? It was clearly only yesterday. Within the relay station, an imperial censor's countenance was pale as he worriedly said, "They can't go past His Majesty. This is an act of insubordination." Zhao Zheng's countenance was gloomy. His gaze swept across everyone's faces as he coldly said, "There is a traitor among us." Chapter 707. Zhao Zheng's gaze swept across everyone's faces. All he saw was astonishment and disbelief. Based on their reactions, it was impossible to tell who the traitor was. The people present all moved away from each other and looked at their companions suspiciously. The atmosphere immediately became tense. After an unknown period of time, an imperial censor finally broke the silence. He asked with a pale face, "Your Highness, the guards of Feng province have surrounded this place. What should we do?" Zhao Zheng also knew that this wasn't the time to catch the traitor. If they continued to suspect the traitor, they would be in a mess before the enemy moved. No matter who the spy planted by Zhao Yi was, the most important thing at this moment was to calm this matter down. This matter was very sensitive. Before he reached an agreement with his father Emperor, it wouldn't be good for them if this matter was blown up. The person he sent to deliver the report this morning had probably just left Feng province. Even if it was urgent, it would take at least half a month for him to make a round trip. "Let's go." Zhao Zheng waved his hand and walked out of the door. The imperial censors followed closely behind him. Outside the relay station, the door opened and several figures walked out. The provincial governor of Feng province cupped his hands and said, "Your Highness. Official Zhou, there's no need to be so polite. A smile appeared on Zhao Zheng's face as he said, I don't know where official Zhou heard the rumor. Everyone here is an imperial censor, an official appointed by the imperial court. We all serve the country wholeheartedly. How could there be someone with ulterior motives who wants to mess up the foundation of our Qi kingdom? It's just a misunderstanding. As a prince of a country, when did he speak so submissively to an insignificant provincial governor? Zhao Zhang had a smile on his face, but the anger in his heart was almost uncontrollable. Provincial Governor Zhou also smiled and said, It's okay, it's okay. Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, we will know after investigating. Zhao Zhang was startled. His gaze gradually turned cold as he asked, How do you want to investigate? Provincial Governor Zhou pointed to the imperial censors behind him and said, Capture a few people and interrogate them. This concerns the continuation of our Qi kingdom. I believe your highness won't mind using a little punishment, right? How dare you? Zhao Zhang could no longer conceal his anger. He turned around and walked into the relay station, coldly saying, I am right here. Come in if you have the guts. What are we going in for? Provincial Governor Zhou was startled. He turned around and waved his hand saying, Guard properly. Other than the first prince, don't let anyone out. On a horse at the back, Zhao Yi looked at the tightly shut door of the relay station. He turned his horse around and disappeared behind the many guards. Chapter 708. Lin Yong squatted on the doorsill and said angrily, Li brothers, do you think money means everything? Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have money? Li Yi glanced at the box under the bed, which contained the gold bars exchanged from the Bai, Ma, and Su families. He walked over, patted Lin Yong on the shoulder side, and said, I don't think it's important to have money or not. It's good to live a simple and happy life. People shouldn't be too vain. Money isn't everything. Can money buy health? Can it buy happiness? No matter how much money you have, it's just a number. Take it easy. Even without money, life is still the same. Lin Yong nodded and said, Li brothers, you're so insightful. That bull*** T first prince wants to talk about the silver. What the hell is the silver? He just needs to pay the money to the authorities after killing people. Will the imperial court still give us ordinary people a way out? When talking about this, Lin Yong became very emotional and clenched his fists tightly. If the first prince were in front of him, he would probably be strangled to death. Li Yi had discovered a long time ago that under Lin Yong's rugged appearance, he was actually a meticulous and nationalistic youth. He shook his head and said, The person who came up with the silver for the silver is really vicious. He doesn't give ordinary people a way out at all. Life will be more and more difficult in the future. That's right. Lin Yong sighed and said, Now there are rumors outside that the first prince's men were detained by the third prince this time because he wanted to carry out the bull*** silver for the Qi kingdom and not give ordinary people a way out. The third prince is really thinking for the people. This time, he detained the first prince, and I'm afraid it's hard to explain to the imperial court. The third prince is wholeheartedly for the people, but unfortunately, alas, only when his subjects and people didn't always think about overthrowing him, but sincerely thought about him, would a successful ruler be able to wield power. In this aspect, Zhao Yi was much better than the first prince. When this news was spread out, not only the people of Feng province, but the entire Qi kingdom would also be grateful to him. It was like a pair of wings had been inserted into his already amazing life. On the other hand, even the relay station had been surrounded. The first prince, who could not even protect himself, should not have the energy or mind to do anything else, right? Although doing so would indirectly clear the obstacles for Zhao Yi, and would pose a greater threat to the Jing kingdom in the future, the threat posed by the first prince was more urgent and pressing. After all, if he wasn't busy, she would be busy. Tui. Silver of judgment. Damn it. Do you want me to live? If the first prince were to become the emperor, we, the commoners, would really be doomed. Fortunately, the third prince is here. For us, he didn't hesitate to offend the first prince and so many officials in the capital city. It's our good fortune to be born in Feng province. These days, the city of Feng province was much livelier than usual. There were more and more people on the streets. Some were from Feng province, while others came from other places to see the shocking scene of more than 1,000 guards surrounding the relay station. When people looked over, they glared fiercely in a certain direction and spat on the ground. Since the news of the Silver of Judgment had spread, the first prince, Zhao Zhang, had become like a rat on the street in Feng province. Everyone wanted to beat him up. This influence was even spreading to further places. Many people surrounded the relay station and pointed at it. In a restaurant in the city, a slightly plump young man looked disdainful. He pointed at several people in front of him and said, "So what if my poem was plagiarized? Bite me. If you say one more word, I'll beat you to death." Have you heard about the Silver of Judgment? Let's calculate how much your lives are worth. Guess if you buy 10 at once, will you get 3 more for free? Opposite him, several young men dressed like scholars involuntarily took a step back. When they thought of what he had just said, their faces turned pale. Trash. If you want to cause trouble next time, make it 13 at once. Qian Duo glanced at them. Did they really think that he was still the fat Qian Duo who had been wantonly bullied in the past? He waved his hand. How could these people take the initiative to cause trouble while he was drinking? He immediately lost all interest and turned to leave. Similarly, in the Feng province relay station, Zhao Zhang, who was facing a table of delicacies, was also not interested at all. The atmosphere in the relay station had been particularly oppressive these days. Although no one restricted his freedom, he would rather stay there when he thought of the situation outside. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Damn it! Who was the one who leaked the news? Originally, everything had been going smoothly for him in Feng province. He had borrowed money, recorded accounts, investigated the accounts, and purged the officials of Feng province. With that secret manual in hand, he had already gained the upper hand. Alas, the news had leaked and the audacious Feng provincial governor had joined forces with Zhao Yi to surround this place. At this moment, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. All he could do now was wait for news from the capital. Zhao Zhang drank a cup of wine to drown his sorrows. He walked out of the door and gazed in a certain direction with an expectant look on his face. The capital of the Qi kingdom. The imperial court, which had never been solemn, was in a mess. The man took out another memorial and respectfully handed it over. He continued, His Highness Prince Feng reports that the supervising imperial censors are acting recklessly. They intend to bring chaos to the foundation of the Qi kingdom and carry out a law of national subjugation. His Highness has already detained all the imperial censors and awaits your Majesty's decision. After he finished speaking, not a single sound could be heard in the imperial court. The emperor of the Qi kingdom slowly sat back down. He pointed to the floor and said in a deep voice, "Bring up the 2 memorials." Chapter 709. The 2 memorials were like 2 pails of ice water poured over one's head, completely extinguishing the heated atmosphere in the court. Prince Hang and Prince Feng were the first prince and third prince of the Qi kingdom respectively. One was the most respected eldest legitimate son, while the other was highly respected among the people and the imperial court. He was the most outstanding prince among the younger generation, and was highly regarded by the emperor. Everyone knew that the next monarch of the Qi kingdom would be one of them. The Qi kingdom did not believe that the eldest legitimate son had the absolute right to inherit the throne. Regardless of whether it was the royal family or the aristocratic families, they all valued the ability first. It was also the will of the emperor to allow the first prince and the third prince to compete. The first prince's daily behavior was commendable. Although he did not make any great achievements, he did not make any big mistakes either. Compared to the exiled king of Shu in the Jing kingdom, he could be considered a very qualified first prince. Although the succession system of the eldest son of the first wife didn't really work in the kingdom of Qi, it was still somewhat biased. Being able to stay in the capital for a long period of time was King Heng's greatest advantage. If the other princes also performed mediocre, his throne wouldn't be threatened. Unfortunately, the third prince, Zhao Yi, was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Among the stars in the sky, he was the one that shone so brightly that it blinded people. He shone so brightly that the emperor and all the officials had no choice but to pay attention to him. When 2 tigers fought, one was bound to be injured. However, one of them lived in the capital, while the other lived in Feng province. Although there were conflicts in the past, it was within the scope of the public's control. The third prince sent his soldiers to surround the courier station where the first prince and the dozen censors lived. This was a little too much. Your Majesty, Prince Feng is too presumptuous. He has defied his superiors by detaining his elder brother. The dozen censors of the censorate are also acting according to the imperial edict. May I know what Prince Feng's intention is? In the silence, someone finally stood up. The one who spoke was the vice minister of the imperial censorate. The vice minister of the imperial censorate was the second highest official in the censorate, second only to the imperial censor. In this kind of situation, the leader of the imperial censorate could not speak casually. The fact that more than 10 imperial censors had been detained was equivalent to a slap to their faces. Thus, even if the other party was the reputable third prince, someone had to stand up and speak. As soon as he finished speaking, an official stood up and asked, "Insubordination." Chapter 7:10. Young man. Watching him walk out, Lin Wanru's lips curled into a rare smile. Are you not a young man yourself? She shook her head, and a strange feeling arose in her heart again. It had only been 2 months since they first met and became familiar with each other. In these 2 months, her impression and understanding of him had changed almost every day. His words and actions were sometimes steady and sometimes childish. It was difficult to understand him. The more time passed, the more she felt that he was shrouded in a mysterious veil, making it difficult for her to see through him. In these 2 months, something was different from before. Whether it was herself or Feng Lin Yuan, they didn't notice or feel anything at first. But when they looked back, they realized that everything seemed to be very different. The Ma family, the Su family, and the Bai family no longer had business dealings with the Lin family. Because of these things, the family had been in a mess these 2 days, but she didn't care. The Lin family didn't need to rely on them anymore, and Feng Lin Yuan was no longer the Feng Lin Yuan of the past. She walked out of the door and looked at the shop with endless customers. She thought that it was time to open another shop. Although he looked like a scholar, he didn't seem to care much about these businessmen. He didn't look down on them or hate them. Now that he and his wife were here, they had to settle down and live, and they had to do something to make a living. She wondered if he would agree if she asked him to be the shopkeeper of the new shop. Speaking of him and that Miss Lu, there was something strange between them. The husband and wife lived in the same room, but slept in separate beds, separated by a curtain. It really didn't look like they were husband and wife. But if they weren't husband and wife, how could they? She couldn't figure out these things, but she felt that the current situation was not bad. If it could continue, she would probably be happy for a few more days. In the small courtyard, Li Yi filtered the medicine into a bowl and threw away the dregs. This was the last packet of medicine. When he returned to the kitchen to look for milk candy, he found that there was not even a bit left. He clearly remembered that there were a few pieces left last night. This time, he was afraid that he had forced himself on Mississippi Lu again. He shook his head and walked into the room with the bowl. Recently, he had been in contact with the brothels in Suzhou, but there was no important news from them. However, after counting the days, they should be arriving soon. It would only be a few days, so he wasn't in a hurry. Li Yi walked into the house and put the bowl on the table. He glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, "There's no more white rabbit creamy candies. Let's make do with it today. It's the last time anyway." Mississippi Lu sat by the table and raised her head slightly to look at him. Chapter 7:11. Young master. Hearing this voice, Li Yi stopped in his tracks. He fiercely chewed the white rabbit creamy candy in his mouth and swallowed it. He turned around and saw 3 figures standing in front of him. Feng's body trembled slightly from a distance of 3 meters. Although the face in front of him was unfamiliar, he had seen the portrait in Suzhou. Moreover, the figure and temperament of the person in front of him were so familiar. How could he forget? "Uncle." Yang Liuqing walked forward and bowed slightly. She was no longer the young girl from a year ago. She had an outstanding temperament and stood there like an unsheathed sword. "County Marquis Li, how have you been?" The middle-aged Taoist in a loose Taoist robe bowed to him and said with a smile. He stood there casually as if he was one with the surrounding heaven and earth. Li Yi's gaze stayed on the 3 for a long time. Then he turned around and opened the courtyard door. Young master, where's second miss? Didn't you say you were together? Fong looked at him and asked eagerly as soon as he closed the courtyard door. Li Yi didn't answer. He first looked at him and asked, "How's Rui? How's the situation at home?" Fong smiled and said, "Mrs. Fine. Everything at home is also fine. They are all waiting for you to return." As soon as he finished speaking, Mississippi Lu walked out of the room. Yang Liuqing quickly walked over and bowed. "Master!" Mississippi Lu looked at her and suddenly reached out to grab her shoulder. Yang Liuqing's body shook and she subconsciously stepped back to dodge, but she couldn't break free in the end. Mississippi Lu patted her on the shoulder and nodded. "Not bad. You didn't forget your martial arts." A figure suddenly flew out from one of the windows of the inn to the side. The sloppy old man landed steadily in the courtyard and stood beside Li Yi. He looked at the middle-aged Taoist warily and asked, "Old Taoist Yuan, why aren't you cultivating? What are you doing here?" A hint of surprise also appeared on the middle-aged Taoist priest's face as he asked, "Strange Su, why are you here when you're not in the Wu Kingdom?" Li Yi turned to look at the sloppy old man and asked, "Do you know each other?" The middle-aged Taoist said, "I met him once when I was traveling around various countries in my early years." The sloppy old man snorted coldly and said, "In this world, apart from these ox-nosed Taoists, who else can practice the art of retaining one's appearance to such a level? When I saw him 30 years ago, he looked like this. I don't know if his martial arts have improved in the past 30 years, but his appearance has not improved at all." Li Yi looked at the two and waved his hand. "We're all on the same side. Sit down and talk." Fong gulped down a bowl of water and said, "We just arrived in Shu province 2 days ago. I heard that young master and second miss are in the Qi kingdom, so we came here without delay." When the provincial governor of Feng province walked out of the door, an official came up to him. The official cupped his hands and bowed before saying, "Lord Zhou, I have investigated the person you asked me to. 2 months ago, the Lin family's caravan went to the Jing kingdom and brought back 2 people from the Jing kingdom. The man's name is Li Xian. He is now the Lin family's accountant." Zhao Yi walked out of the room and looked at him as he asked, "What did you say? The Jing kingdom's Li Xian?" "Your Highness." The official was about to bow when Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Repeat what you just said." "Yes." The official said again, "The young man and woman were saved by the Lin family's caravan from the Jing kingdom when they passed by Shu province. The man's name is Li Xian. Shu province's Li Xian." "Yes, I understand." A smile appeared on Zhao Yi's face as he strode towards the exit. The group of guards followed closely behind him. Fenglin Court. Zhao Yi stood in front of a shop in the city. He looked at the signboard above and murmured, "As expected." Someone behind him said, "Your Highness, this is one of the Lin family's shops in Feng province. There are 2 other shops like this." The middle-aged scholar next to Zhao Yi waved his fan and said, "Your Highness, are we going to the Lin family now?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "How can we be so hasty? Let's go back to the imperial residence first." "Your Highness, someone just delivered an invitation card." In King Feng's residence, the housekeeper presented an invitation card to Zhao Yi as soon as he returned. "Who sent it?" In the study room, Zhao Yi was holding a pen and writing. He asked casually, "I don't know." "It was inserted into the residence's door with a dagger," the housekeeper replied with a bow. Recently, the imperial residence had encountered a series of strange things. It was not the first time a dagger had been used to deliver a letter. Sending an invitation card was nothing to be alarmed about. "A dagger." Zhao Yi paused and waved his hand. "Give it to me." He took the invitation card from the housekeeper and read it carefully. He crumpled the written invitation card into a ball and said with a smile, "Get ready. I will be leaving soon." One was a young man, one was a middle-aged Taoist, and the last one was a sloppy old man. The young man looked around and asked, "There are no guests here. Do I need to make a reservation? If you want to eat, I recommend you to go to the restaurant across the street." The waiter smiled and said, "You must have a reservation to eat here." In fact, reservations were just a way of saying it to the outside world. Feng State City wasn't big. The waiter knew very well who needed to make a reservation and who didn't. "I'm leaving." Ask them to make the same thing for lunch. Qian Duo tore a chicken leg, stood up, and walked out of the door. The waiter quickly said, "Yes, young master." Li Yi looked at the slightly fat young man and said, "Qian Duo?" Qian Duo turned his head and looked at him. He frowned and asked, "Do I know you?" Li Yi looked at him and said with a smile, "Sorry, I still don't have change today. I'll give you the money back next time." Qian Duo's eyes suddenly widened when he heard this. His whole body trembled and he blurted out, "You are that brother." Qian Duo stood at the door of the most luxurious private room in the Qian family restaurant and said to the waiter behind him, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and give us all the signature dishes here." "Yes, young master. I'll ask someone to do it right away." The waiter responded and hurried downstairs. Qian Duo looked at the young man in front of him. Although he had traded with him twice, he had never seen his appearance. At this time, it was inevitable that he had a strange feeling in his heart. "Brother, what else do you want to eat? I'll ask someone to arrange it right away." Although it was strange, his eagerness and enthusiasm didn't diminish at all. After all, the next time he had pocket money, he was going to buy a few hundred poems. This time he would buy cheap ones. He wanted to win by quantity. How could he not shut those people's mouths? "There's no need." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'll meet a friend here in a while. I'll leave soon." He had some doubts about the reliability of Lin Yong's recommendation of this restaurant. There wasn't a single customer. It didn't look like the best restaurant in Fengzhou City. Don't worry. You go first." Qian Duo smiled, closed the door, and left. Even if 100 poems were worth 100 taels of silver, it would still cost 10,000 taels of silver. He needed time to prepare. The opportunity was rare. If he missed it this time, he didn't know when he would encounter it again. When he walked down the stairs, there were several figures coming in from outside. "Dad." Qian Duo walked over and looked at the god of fortune in the crowd. He asked in surprise, "Dad, why are you here?" "Shut up." Qian Duo glared at him and asked, "Is there any guest in the restaurant now? Who are they?" "No." Qian Duo shook his head at first. Then he seemed to have thought of something and said, "There is a friend of mine upstairs." As soon as Qian Duo finished speaking, a door opened upstairs. A young man walked out and looked down. He smiled and said, "I've been waiting for His Royal Highness King Feng for a long time." Qian Duo scratched his head and said in surprise, "Not much. I just arrived and the dishes haven't been served yet." "Dad, why did you hit me?" Qian Duo covered his head and looked at the god of fortune with some resentment. Qian Duo glanced at the top of the stairs and pulled his arm to the side. "Tell me, how do you know the person upstairs?" In the private room, after Zhao Yi sat down, he looked at Li Yi with a hint of doubt on his face. He asked, "Brother Li, why are you?" Li Yi reached behind his ear with one hand and gently tore off the mask. "There's actually such a strange thing in the world." Zhao Yi looked at the thin mask in Li Yi's hand with a hint of surprise on his face. Then he looked at Li Yi and said, "Brother Li, since you've arrived in Feng Province, why are you only now?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's a long story." After a while, Zhao Yi had a look of realization on his face. He said, "The holy religion does have a huge influence in the Qi kingdom. They are very well hidden, and we don't know what they're planning. They're a big problem for the imperial court. But don't worry, Brother Li. No matter how long their hands are, they can't reach Feng Province." "It doesn't matter anymore," Li Yi said as he shook his head. If he really met the Taoist nun now, it was uncertain who would kidnap who. Zhao Yi looked at him and asked, "The person who sent the message to the prince's mansion 2 days ago should have been arranged by Brother Li, right?" As he spoke, he turned his head and looked at the sloppy old man who was sitting to the side and eating a chicken leg. The sloppy old man didn't even raise his head as he focused on eating the chicken leg in his hand. "It's a small matter, a small matter." Li Yi didn't deny it. He looked at him and pointed at the dishes on the table, saying, "I still owe you a meal. Let's pay it off today." "It's a small matter for Brother Li, but it's not for me." Zhao Yi cupped his hands in obeisance and said, "This time, I owe Brother Li a favor. I'll definitely pay it back in the future if I have the chance." "Don't worry about the future." Li Yi raised his wine cup and looked at him, saying, "Now is fine too. Zhao Yi raised his head and looked at him in surprise. He asked, "Brother Li, you mean?" Li Yi looked at him and said, "There's no time like the present. Let's do it today." Chapter 7:13. After listening to him, Zhao Yi's expression changed slightly. He asked, "Brother Li, you're leaving?" Li Yi nodded and said, "I've been away from home for too long. It's time for me to go back." Zhao Yi was silent for a while and said, "Don't worry and leave. I'll help take care of the Lin family. However, Brother Li, you have to think this through. Zhao Yi's favor is far more than this. One can't be too greedy. If I wanted tens of millions of liang of silver and feng zhou, you wouldn't give it to me, would you?" Li Yi smiled and raised his head. He waved his hand at the people behind Zhao Yi and said, "Come, Brother Xiaofan, Brother Yanzhou, don't just stand there. Sit down and eat." Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiaofan glanced at Zhao Yi. Seeing him nod, they sat on either side of him. A few days ago, the poems that were circulating in Fengzhou were written by Brother Li, right? Ever since Li Yi appeared, Zhao Xiaofan's gaze rarely left his face. After he sat down, this was the first thing he asked. Li Yi waved his hand and denied. "It was written by Brother Qian. Business was all about integrity. Money and goods were cleared. Those poems had nothing to do with him now that they were out of his hands. In fact, they had nothing to do with him in the first place." After Zhao Xiaofan asked that question, he realized he had asked a pointless question. Since he had seen him here, there was no need to argue about who the poems belonged to. Li Yi ate 2 mouthfuls of food and looked at Yang Yanzhou with some surprise. He asked, "When did the foremost scholar of Qing and Prefecture come to the Qi Kingdom?" In front of Brother Li, it's best not to mention anything about being the foremost scholar. Yang Yanzhou smiled and said, "Besides, Yanzhou was born in the Qi Kingdom and grew up in the Qi Kingdom. I'm just returning home from a faraway trip." Li Yi nodded and looked at Zhao Yi. "Oh right, I didn't cause any trouble for His Highness this time, did I?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "If this is considered trouble, then the more trouble the better. If one were to look at the entire Qi Kingdom, the debit and credit method and the matter of the guilty silver were indeed like 2 huge stones thrown into a calm lake, stirring up quite a storm. This storm did not only exist in Feng Province and the capital. It was now spreading to even more places. Moreover, the effects of these 2 incidents were far less significant. Although the waves had calmed, the undercurrents at the bottom of the lake had been thrown into even greater disarray by these 2 boulders. It was still unknown what the outcome of this trip to the capital would be. Zhao Yi raised his head and looked at the opposite side. The source of all these things was that he had casually done something in Fengzhou City. Although this matter would be of great help to him, a person who could single-handedly cause chaos in a country was truly terrifying. With the help of such a person, a mere country would be nothing. One day he might even become the ruler of the world. Li Yi looked up at Zhao Yi and said, "Brother Zhao, why are you still in a daze? Let's eat." At the entrance of the Qian family's restaurant, Li Yi cupped his hands in obeisance to Zhao Yi and said, "After this farewell, I don't know when we will meet again. Brother Zhao, take care." Zhao Yi also cupped his hands in obeisance. "Brother Li, take care." Qian Duo, who was behind the crowd, was firmly held down by the money god. As he watched the figure disappear, he became dejected. In front of them, Yang Yanzhou withdrew his gaze and asked, "Your Highness, why didn't you keep him?" "We couldn't keep him." Behind Zhao Yi, the middle-aged scholar breathed a sigh of relief and sighed. "Even His Majesty doesn't have such a grand entourage to accompany and protect him. How could we keep him?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "How can forcing him to stay be better than being willing?" Yang Yanzhou said, "Given his character, how could he stay in the Qi Kingdom willingly?" "Soon." Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "Early this morning, I received a messenger from Jingdo on horseback. The emperor of the Jing Kingdom hasn't been to court for half a month." Yang Yanzhou was stunned and asked, "Is the Jing Kingdom going to change?" Zhao Yi nodded and said, "I'm afraid it's going to happen soon." Yang Yanzhou thought for a moment and said, "But we haven't gotten the divine punishment yet. The Qi Kingdom hasn't been decided yet. It's too early. Even if we get the secret recipe, I'm afraid there will be more trouble." Zhao Yi looked back at the money god and said, "Do you know the Lin family in Feng Province?" Money god was confused and said, "There are many Lin family in Feng Province. Which one are you talking about, Your Highness? Zhao Yi thought for a moment and said, it seems to be a jewelry business. Money God scratched his head and said, I seem to have a little impression of it. Do you want to pack your things when you go back in case it's too late to leave? This was the third time the sloppy old man had asked in a roundabout way. Li Yi tilted his head to look at him and said, I'm sure. We'll leave tomorrow. Su, if you have any other questions, just ask them now. The sloppy old man waved his hand and said, I'm just asking casually. There's nothing urgent. It won't be too late to postpone it for another 2 days. Then postpone it for another day. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, tomorrow is a little rushed. It's not easy to go if it's too late. It's better to set off in the morning the day after tomorrow. The sloppy old man was stunned and said, it doesn't matter if we travel at night. We're all people in the martial arts world. It's normal to travel at night. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Chapter 7:14. Although the Lin family was not as rich as the Qian family in Fengzhou, and there were hundreds of shopkeepers in the shops under their name, the number of people in the shops was not small, including the members of the small chamber of commerce led by the Lin family. Every 6 months, the Lin family would gather these people together. Firstly, it was to connect with each other, and secondly, it was to evaluate their achievements. Based on this, they would reward or punish them. Occasionally, they would also make some changes in personnel. Although the accounts of the Lin family were personally handled by Lin Wanru, as the accountant, Li Yi naturally had the right to participate in this meeting. Apart from the 2 days he stayed here at the beginning, this was the second time he came to the Lin family. Today, the Lin family was very lively. Li Yi did not know many members of the Lin family, and now there were many new faces. He had never been interested in such a banquet. Yesterday, he just did not think about how to bid farewell to Lin Wanru, so he agreed to it. In fact, he still had not thought about it. If it was just a relationship of using each other from the beginning, there was nothing to worry about. Leaving a letter was enough, and there was no need for any explanation. Any explanation would be an explanation for the previous deception, and it would be difficult to say it. After all, he was shy and embarrassed. Lin Wanru was now the real master of the Lin family, and everyone was afraid of her. Naturally, there were many social engagements this morning. Li Yi saw her walking back and forth a few times, but he only nodded or smiled slightly. He did not even have time to speak. There were quite a few people who glanced at him or stopped at him. Occasionally, he could hear some gossip. For example, what was the relationship between this accountant and the young lady of the Lin family? Could it be that he was keeping a gigolo outside? It was really unusual for the young lady of the Lin family to be unmarried at this age. She was as pretty as a flower and had an exquisite figure. This gigolo had gotten a bargain. Li Yi reached out and touched his face. These days he was busy and did not have much time to bask in the sun. Maybe his face was a little pale, but it did not matter. It would be back to black after a month of basking in the sun. He really missed the small courtyard and the rocking chair at home. Lin Yong kicked over the stool of someone who was gossiping and sat opposite Li Yi. He said, I hate these people who gossip behind people's backs the most. What's the use of talking behind people's backs? Do you have the guts to say it in front of the young lady? Lin Yong glanced at Lin Wanru, who was surrounded by countless people not far away. He picked up a pot of tea from the table and gulped it down. Only then did he wipe his mouth and say, Miss plans to open a new shop. She will announce it today.